Hi friends, and welcome to the Heartful Parent Podcast. I'm your host, Christy Keating. In this podcast, we talk about it all, our parenting, our partnering, and our professional lives, because they are all a part of us, and we were never meant to do this alone.
Hey there, welcome back, Heartful Parent Podcast listeners. As always, I am thrilled to have you here. And as I promised you last week, we are going to be diving back into some podcast episodes with guests and getting some really exciting stuff in front of you for this fall 2024 season. And today is no exception. I'm really thrilled to be introducing you to today's podcast guest. She and I met several months ago through a mutual contact. And when we started chatting, I just knew that we were aligned in our values, in the way that we wanted to support parents and teenagers. And I'm just so thrilled to have her here. Now, before I introduce her, before I tell you about her, I want to say that although this episode and the work that today's guest does is geared towards parents of tweens and teens, if you have younger children, I would invite and encourage you to stick around, to keep listening, because what we do with our younger children impacts who they become as tweens and teens. And today's guest really paints a very clear picture of some ways in which that happens, that may be good for your teen or may not be so good for your teen. And I'm a big fan, and I talk a lot in my work and with my private coaching clients of sort of parenting with the end in mind. And although the teenage years aren't the end, right, of our parenting journey, what we do with them when they're younger leads to the teen years, and it is one of the ends, right? So we really do have to parent with the end in mind. We want to think about what we're doing with those younger kids and how it might impact teens. So although this is sort of like really highlights those teen years, as I said, if you've got younger kids, this is for you as well. And so with that, I want to introduce today's guest. So today's guest is Dr. Melanie McNally. And Dr. McNally is a clinical psychologist, a brain coach, a speaker, and the author of 2 books. The first book is The Emotionally Intelligent Teen: Skills to Help You Deal with What You Feel, Build Stronger Relationships, and Boost Self-Confidence, which is geared towards teens. And the second book, which is coming out on September 1st, called Helping Your Unmotivated Teen: A Parent's Guide to Unlock Your Child's Potential. Dr. McNally is recognized nationally for her expertise and has been invited to the White House to discuss the paramount importance of teen mental health. She's appeared in the Huffington Post, Parents Magazine, Business Insider, Fast Company, and more. Dr. Melanie's mission is unwavering: to ensure every person not only becomes the best version of themselves, but a version they're genuinely proud of. And I'm so excited to introduce her to you because I have learned so much from her. I'm so excited for her book to come out. I have it on pre-order. I am waiting for it to arrive. And for those who also, find today's conversation to be really informative, at the end, I will share with you a way that you might just be able to get a free copy of her book. So stay tuned. Listen to the end. And without further ado, Dr. Melanie McNally. All right, Dr. McNally, Melanie, so thrilled to have you on the Heartful Parent Podcast. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me. I'm so excited I get to talk with you.
I am really excited as well. You and I met a few months back, and we've had the chance to talk and get to know one another a little bit. And you've got, as I said in the intro, you've got this really exciting book coming out on September 1st. Although the way the Amazon fairies, work, they might let you have it early. We're not sure about that. But I want to dig into that. But first, I read the more formal bio, but tell me just a little bit about how you got into this world of supporting teens and digging into the brain of these creatures. And I have one living in my house who can be amazing, confounding, fun, frustrating, all of those things. What led you to this line of work?
Yes. So I myself personally, I grew up in a very dysfunctional and unhealthy household. And on top of that, I was like riddled with anxiety. And I didn't have any support at that time. Like, I didn't have family support. I didn't have outside support to like navigate what I was going through at my house, but then also just what I was going through on like an anxiety neurodevelopmental brain level. And as I got older, I got really interested in how to help myself feel better in the world and feel more confident, feel less anxious. But then, and as I learned to do that, I was like, I want to do this for other young people. I want to help them build self awareness and learn how to self regulate. And I want to be the support for them that I so desperately needed when I was their age. And so that kind of led me into the world of teen mental health. And it's really fun because I know a lot of parents especially get really frustrated with teens. And I've been working, specializing in teens since 2013. And I don't really ever tire of them because they're like, the teen years are all about identity formation. And it's all about like figuring out who you are. Like, that's the bulk of what you're doing during adolescence. And I think it is so special and fun to get to be a part of that, to get to help them figure out like who they want to be in the world and what that looks like for them and what feels authentic and genuine for them, and to help them navigate that phase. So it never gets tiring.
I love that you just said that, because you're right. Like, teens can be frustrating and confusing for us as parents. And I know that there are parents out there, parents who are listening to this, who are having very difficult journeys with their teens. And the positivity that you just brought, or the positive lens that you just lent to our teens, I think it's such an important one, because, although I don't always understand my own teenager, I was talking with some other parents not that long ago, and all of us were saying they can be really fascinating and fun. And, I have a 7-year-old at home as well, and I adore her. And, she's got all these cute, funny antics, but the level of connection and the type of conversations that I can have with my teen as I see her stepping into that identity and figuring out who she is and exploring the world is also really fun. It's fun in a different way, but it's really fun.
It is. It's fun to watch them like figure things out and kind of sort through information and like filter through things. And social connections are huge during the teen years. Like, most of their brain is devoted to relationships outside the family. And so even getting to like hear how they think about their friends and how they think about social groups and friend groups at school, it's like this little window inside of, their mind that you get to kind of just like to witness. But I do want to, support what you're saying. There are a lot of parents out there who are going through a really tough time, including, clients I've worked with and their parents. And I get that. And I know it can be really challenging, and there can be a lot of dips during the teen years. And I know how hard that can be for parents. And so I don't want to, gloss over it like the teen years are all beautiful or wonderful.
Yeah, no, and I don't either. And just to be clear for anyone listening, I do have a lot of fun with my teen, but it's not all like puppies and rainbows in my house all the time either, right? There are times where I just want to pull my hair out and say, I don't understand what's happening right now, even though on an intellectual level I might understand it. Right? It can be still emotionally really challenging as a parent.
Yeah.
And one of the things, that I have seen in my own kid at times, and that I certainly have been hearing from parents, we've got all these I think the word epidemic gets bandied about a lot. We know that there's an epidemic of mental health challenges and anxiety with our teens. But I'm also hearing that a lot of parents are worried on sort of one of two like ends of the spectrum. One, we've got these teens who are under so much pressure, and they put pressure on themselves, and parents put pressure on them, and teachers and college applications and all of that. And so they're like burning themselves out before they even leave the house, right? But then there's the other side, and I don't want to diminish, like that has its own challenges. But then there's the other side of it where I'm hearing from parents, like my teen is unmotivated. Like I can't get them to do anything. I can't get them to, put down their video games, or I can't get them to like leave the house or join a sport or make a friend or, whatever it might be. And I know that's really the root or the reason for the book that you have coming out. But I'd love to dig into that. Like why, given all of your work with teens and the research that you've done in preparation for writing your book, why are we seeing that happen in a way that feels, I think, to many parents, different than anything that we saw when we were growing up or saw in previous generations?
Yes, and it really is different. It is different than previous generations. It's funny because so when I first started like specifically really honing in on teens in 2013, I used to do something with feeling cards where I used to, have this whole array of feeling cards, and we would use them to help the teen figure out like which feelings were the most challenging for them to manage. And back in 2013, it was pretty consistently where I was getting teens who were pulling out anxiety, frustration, embarrassment. Like those were the toughest feelings for them to manage. And then I started noticing this shift around like 2015, 2016, where teens started pulling out the card boredom.
Mhm.
And all of a sudden the other feelings like disappeared, where they no longer knew how to tolerate boredom, and that became the most challenging emotion for them to handle, like above anger, above anxiety. And at the time I was like, what is happening? This is mind-blowing. Why is boredom stepping into this realm? And now we're seeing from books like The Anxious Generation, iGen, The New Adolescence, where they've pulled all of this research and looked at what's been happening to teens over the last several years. And we see the injection of, smartphones and devices where they no longer have to experience discomfort or boredom, because the second you're bored, the second you're uncomfortable, you can get on your device and you can have this like digital regulation tool. And then what ends up happening is they don't learn how to actually self-regulate, because they have this like short-term solution of like, okay, if I scroll, yeah, it feels good short term. It's not helping me long term. And it certainly isn't teaching me how to actually self-regulate. And so now we have all of these teens who don't know what to do when they really feel awful, or when a device isn't enough to self-soothe or self-regulate.
Mhm.
And they're in this really bad place. And then we're seeing an increase in anxiety, increase in depression, increase in suicidal ideation, more hospital admissions, because at the root cause, they're not learning how to self-regulate.
Wow. Okay. So, I mean, obviously I've heard, about challenges from parents and professionals and in my own world of screens. And I think we as adults are, those have become a real crutch for many of us as well, right? That phenomenon isn't unfamiliar to me, working in the parenting space. But this connection to the inability to tolerate boredom is really interesting. And I would love to have you sort of, go a bridge further and talk about how that then in turn is impacting motivation to do other things, right? Whether it be homework or sports or friends or music or, hobbies. How does that inability to tolerate boredom and the grab for the screen then impact everything else?
Yeah. So let me try and make the connection, but it might be a long-winded answer.
That's okay. We're
So,
here for it.
okay. So essentially motivation, and this is what I really cover in my book, Helping Your Unmotivated Teen, is motivation is made up of 3 skill sets. So it's made up of drive, grit, and goals. You've got your drive, which is like your passion and your purpose. You have your grit, which is your ability to stick with something when it gets really boring or hard. And then you have your goals, which are your roadmap forward. So teens can be, and anyone can be lacking in any one of those areas or all 3 of those areas. But what happens with screens is if we're constantly on a screen, we don't have, it takes the place of developing passions.
Mm,
Because if we are filling that time with scrolling mindlessly or just watching YouTube videos with no purpose or no point or no intention, we're just kind of watching them endlessly, then how is the teen developing anything that they can be passionate about? They don't have the space and the time that you need to explore passions. And that means, trying something that might fizzle out. That might mean being so bored after school that you start baking in the kitchen and then you realize that you love baking. There's not that cushion of just time and space to explore because of screens. It also impacts grit because
mhm,
grit, that ability to stick with things when it gets really hard or boring. If the second something gets hard, if I can just, okay, my math is too difficult, I'm going to just go, see what's going on Instagram, or I'm going to just start texting with friends. I'm not developing that grit muscle. And what I see with a lot of teens and young adults today is that they don't have that grit muscle in place. And it really is a muscle. It's something that builds and gets stronger over time. And
mhm,
so they're not getting that opportunity to develop it, and I'll even see parents do this with like younger kids. They have a 5-minute car ride and they're handing their kid a phone, or they have to wait in line for 30 seconds and they're sticking a device in their face. So they're
mhm.
not giving them the opportunity to just get a little gritty because you build and you get grittier and grittier over time. And so it takes that place in that area as well too. And then those things can then bleed over into goals, but it's not as directly, I would say, related and tied to screen use as we see with drive and with grit.
Yeah. Although I have to imagine that if you're sort of lacking the drive and lacking the grit, you're probably not taking the time to create a lot of goals.
Definitely. You
Yeah.
you need to have, yeah, things that you're passionate about. You want goals that are aligned with, what your purpose is, what your passion is, for sure. And you need grit to stick with goals because you can have a goal that you are completely passionate about and absolutely in love with, but no matter what, it's going to get hard. It's going to get mundane. It's going to get boring, and so you need to have grit in place to be able to stick with it.
Yeah. I mean, obviously we're coming off the Summer Olympics and listening to the training regimens of some of the athletes. Um and the way, I mean, just the endless laps in the pool and I was a swimmer. I used to be a competitive swimmer many years ago, but I clearly didn't have quite the same drive and grit because the endless laps in the pool that like Katie Ledecky does to get where she is really quite phenomenal. And obviously we're not necessarily expecting anything of that from our teens, but we're really sort of falling behind in terms of getting anywhere kind of close to that in many cases.
Yeah, and it can even be with having to, fill out a college application or having a job search. Like those are things that still require a high level of grit, because it gets boring to search for jobs, or it gets hard when you keep getting rejected over and over and over again. But that's also, we know, like that's part of the process. When you're a teen and you're applying for your first job, you're going to get rejected a lot before you find something.
Yeah.
And so you need to be a little gritty, so you're not just after 3 being like, oh, this is too hard, and then you give up.
Yeah. So I'd love to ask you, because this is something that I see in my own home that I find frankly so frustrating as a parent. And you've just so eloquently described how the screens that our kids are on can impact those really important developmental pieces of and components, I guess, of motivation. And as a parent, my husband and we put limitations on my daughter's cell phone, in terms of both content, but also time. And there are times when I will simply say, hey, you've got to work on school. Like I'm taking your phone in my office where you can't get to it. Great. Like, I try to manage and help support her in the ways that I can, but her homework is on a computer that I don't get to control. And one of the struggles that we've had, to be very frank, is, especially with a teen with an ADHD brain, screens are a challenge to begin with. But like YouTube is available right on her school computer, and I don't get any control over that. I can't stop that. And we've put in, strategies and sort of approaches in place where she does her homework downstairs, not in her bedroom. It's at a desk where anybody walking by can see what she's looking at. And some of that has been at her request because that actually helps her. But what is a parent to do who's like, I'm not home, my kid's doing their homework, I'm not there, I can't monitor that? How do we support them when it sometimes feels like the world is working against us?
I know. I cannot stand how much work now is done on screens at schools. And I'll hear from teens constantly where they're like, oh my gosh, I am on a screen all day at school. And then I come home and I have to do all of my homework on a screen. Like they feel the screen fatigue and the vision fatigue themselves, and they get sick of it. So I really wish, schools would do some things offline and some things, paper. Like it's really good to have that whole process of like handwriting and like planning things out and drawing and having like big, white paper in front of you to help you like visually think about things. So I really wish some schools would get back into that, or some teachers would. But
Yes.
for the people who are really struggling with that and having that, it's, if you're not around your teen when they're doing homework, I would suggest starting with like building some self-awareness in your teen around how they're spending their time. And you want to do it in a way where it's not like naggy, where you're just like on their back about things, but encouraging them, because like, let's say I had a teen who was claiming that she was spending, like 5 hours on homework. It was, just too much. And I was like, oh my gosh, what is happening at your school that they're giving you that much homework? This is
Yes.
insane. And so we need to track how you're spending your time on, and see what's going on. And so she had to keep like a little separate pad where she wrote things down and while she was doing homework. And we found that it wasn't actually homework that was distracting her. It was like watching YouTube videos. It was doing all these other things. And her mind was like, because it was me, I was a neutral source. I wasn't a parent. I'm not there to shame her, get her in trouble. It's something that she wanted to work on. And then when she saw how much time she was actually spending doing all this other stuff, she couldn't believe it. And so that self-awareness of like what she's actually doing on her computer helped, because now we're like, okay, we have to create some change here. So you're not spending 5 hours on homework when really you're actually only doing maybe an hour and a half of
Mhm.
schoolwork. And the rest of the time you're just scrolling, and then you're exhausted when you go to bed because you've just been on your screen the whole time.
Yeah. Yes.
Helping that if you can find a way, whether it's you, a family member, a coach, whatever, a school counselor, someone who they have a positive relationship with, helping them build that self-awareness around how they're actually spending their time on their computer can make a really big difference. And then also encouraging them to take breaks away from their screen. So like, let's say your daughter, you're not home and you know she's doing all her homework on there. She's doing a great job, but she still needs breaks from the screen. And what I tell teens is that if you think scrolling on Instagram is a break from your homework, that's completely false, because you're actually using the same part of your brain to scroll on Instagram as what you're doing while you're doing homework. So it's not actually a break. To your brain, you might as well have just been doing homework on your screen the whole time, because
Mm.
it's the exact same thing. So you really want a true break. And then I help like teach them what a true break is during homework time, so that they're actually getting in that break. And then it gives them, it reduces fatigue. It helps them with focus and all of that.
I'm laughing a little bit as you're talking, because I'm like, I think adults could probably stand to learn this as well, right? Right, where we're like, oh, I don't want to write that email. I'll just take a little break and see what's going on Facebook, right?
Totally.
Or, and I'm dating myself because I know it's only the old people that go on Facebook anymore. I'd love to have you give an example of just a few things that are real breaks for our brains, because I think this is where that brain science really comes into all of this, right?
Yes. So things that are going to use a different part of your brain. So it will not include scrolling. It does not include reading. It does not include talking. So true breaks are going to be like going outside and staring at the clouds, stretching or doing some light exercise, eating or drinking without doing anything else while you're eating or drinking. Even a nap, like a 10-15 minute nap is a break, or
Mhm.
staring at a blank wall. So essentially, it's non-stimulating, it's cognitively non-stimulating, and it is not causing any dopamine to be released. We don't want that, because if you get a lot of dopamine from scrolling and then it's really hard to stop, or like watching a video and then that's really hard to stop. So you want it to be this cognitively unstimulating break where you're not using that prefrontal cortex. And so those, like, the stretching, light exercise, even like listening to music, or like music that might make you move your body, that can be a good break too.
Uh-huh. Love it. I my poor daughter is like, oh, there's conversations coming. She always like, I mean, she loves what I do and also hates what I do, because I always get these new ideas and I'm like, we got to talk about this. She's like, thanks, Mom. That's great. Tell Melanie, thank you. Um, no, I think that's such an important thing for all of us to think about. And the conversation I was actually imagining having with my daughter is oftentimes for her, reading is actually a break. Like that's what she does as a break. And what I'm hearing you say is that because that's still stimulating to that prefrontal cortex, that her brain isn't seeing that as a break.
Correct. It's not really a break for her brain. And so when she goes back to, like, let's say it's math, or she goes, whatever she's going to go back to do, her brain isn't going to get that like rest and time away, and so it's still going to be really hard. She can do the, save the reading for like a later time when she doesn't
Mhm.
necessarily have to go back to something difficult. But yeah, I have a client who does that too. He loves to read, and so he'll use that as a break. But we've tested it out, because he was really committed to it. He's like, I'm reading science fiction, it doesn't count. I'm like, okay, well, let's just test it and see how you feel. And so, like,
Mhm.
let's try that. And then let's try a couple of weeks where you do other things on breaks and see what the difference is. And he just had to rate how he felt on a scale of 1 to 10, after each break. And so he found that doing the other things actually did help him feel a little bit better.
Wow. I mean, that's right. That's one of those classic, like proof is in the pudding,
Yeah.
moments that it's really helpful. And as I said earlier, I laugh and joke that I'm going to have a conversation with my teenager, but I'm actually going to have a conversation with myself. and what I'm using as breaks as well throughout my day.
Yeah, I do the same thing where I'll want to check email during, in between client sessions or whatever. And I have found that I feel so much more exhausted at the end of a work day versus if I go and like play with my dogs, or if I just go step outside and maybe I do a little bit of stretching or I do a quick walk. At the end of the day, I don't feel as exhausted and drained.
Mm-hmm.
Like that for me is enough because I don't want to finish my work day and then just be so tired that I can't do anything else.
Yes. Yeah. Um, my brain is spinning with the ideas of things that I could do as breaks that would actually be a good break.
Yeah.
You touched on this briefly, but I know, as parents, when we see that lack of motivation kicking in for our teens, we often go to a place of fear, right? And because we start to worry. What if this kid never does X, Y, or Z? What if this kid doesn't launch because, they can't motivate to get their college applications in or whatever it is? And, I say this again and again, parenting from a place of fear is never a good place to be parenting from. But at the same time, it's so easy to slip into that. So, and when we're in that place of fear, I think we tend to resort to things like talking at our children, nagging them. You mentioned the nagging, right? Like it's so easy to be like, go, you need to go do da 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 da, right? And we can rattle off all the things that our kids should be doing. But we also know, or at least I think you and I know, and I think many of our listeners have seen this happen. When we nag, when we talk at our teens, they shut down, they shut it off. They're not tuned in with us. So what do you recommend? And maybe what do you hear from your teen clients? Like, how is it most effective for parents to make an impact, to help increase motivation without slipping into that place of fear that then translates to ineffective communication?
So a few things. One is, like you said, checking yourself and kind of seeing where you're coming from and where that fear is rooted, because sometimes the fear actually has nothing to do with the teen. It's, based on the parent may have a fear based on like their own personal experience or maybe something that happened with the sibling of the teen. And so it's actually not about them at all. And so first to kind of reflect on like, where is this fear truly coming from? But then and also to think about the teen years as like a roller coaster. There's always going to be these ups and downs. And your job as a parent is to be an observer of the roller coaster. Your job is not to get on and be a rider. And so sometimes when it's really easy, and now I'm not a parent, so I can only imagine, but I see how difficult it is when teens are really struggling, where parents jump on that roller coaster and then all of a sudden they're struggling right alongside them. And
Mm-hmm.
we want the parent to be the observer. And so they're kind of watching and seeing, okay, is this just a natural dip where they're going to come back up? Or are they consistently going down? Is this getting worse and worse? But being an observer gives you a little bit more of a broader perspective. Like maybe you need more outside help or some professional help, or maybe this is just kind of a natural course, something that happens during the teen years and the motivation dips and it's going to come back up.
Mm-hmm.
One thing that can help a lot with the communication, and I have a lot of my parents do this with their teens, and it's been very helpful, is to have a communication journal where you write back and forth to each other. And I have it on my website too, where you can download it for free if your listeners go to destinationu.net, where you can get my communication journal. But or you can just use a blank notebook, but you just write back and forth to each other, because it gives the parent a chance to respond, to think before they respond, so they're not like overreacting. And it also takes away that vulnerability and shame, like that a teen might feel when they have to share something face to face. So that can help to like open up communication and for you to see, okay, to share. Like, I've noticed that you've been spending more time in your bedroom lately. I'm concerned, what's going on? And then it gives the teen time and space to like reflect and share back with you what's going on. And
Yeah.
so that can help a lot. And I'll hear from teens how much that helps because they're not as embarrassed telling their parent.
Yes. My teen daughter and I have done that for several years now. We have a notebook that we, and it kind of comes and goes. We don't always need it. She doesn't always feel like she needs it, but we use it back and forth. And it has been such a gift to our relationship and things that she'll share in there that, are questions that she has or concerns or worries. And it gives her a place to ask those that, just feels, I think, less vulnerable to her. So I would totally echo that as a fabulous tool. I know that most of the work that you do is directly with teens when you're not writing a brilliant book to help parents. What are you hearing from them that is like something they wish their parents knew or understood, sort of related to all of this?
Oh, that's a good question. I think, let me think about this for a minute, because first of all, I hear a lot of complaints from teens that they wish their parents would kind of walk their talk, that the parent will tell them how to behave and tell them what to do, but the parent themselves isn't doing that. And that really frustrates them because they feel like, why should I do something if you're not going to do it yourself?
Mm-hmm.
But I think a lot of teens wish that parents knew like how truly challenging it is during the teen years, what it actually feels like. I think a lot of parents they forget what it's like to be a teenager. And to a teen, a lot of the experiences that they're struggling through, whether it's like worrying about grades or friendship problems or the pimple on their face, that to them feels bigger than a parent worrying about their mortgage and how they're going to pay. Like, it's huge to them. And they feel like their parent minimizes their struggles quite a bit.
Mm.
I was very fortunate that I saved all of my journals I kept a journal from like, I don't know, as soon as I could write. I've had journals my entire life and I've kept them. And I make a point once a year, I go back and reread my journals from my teen years as a reminder of what it's like to be a teenager. Because when I read it, I'm like, oh my gosh, somebody, like, you could diagnose me with like 50 different things. And, it was like nonstop drama and just, the friend stuff and just like all the things I worried about with relationships. And then on top of that, like all the real things that were going on in my house. It was a lot. And I think parents forget how much like is actually happening during the teen years inside your brain.
Such a good point. I mean, I think there's so many parts of our lives, like we, as a mom who has given birth to children, like that is thankfully something that, I didn't remember exactly what it was like the first time. So I was willing to do it again. And I think those teen years are really kind of like that they can be really painful, even when you have pretty good ones, like they are hard. And so our brain has this beautiful function of kind of erasing that. And we think we understand, but we don't. And it's different now. It is different now for them, right? They
It
are
is.
navigating things we never had to navigate.
Well, they're aware of a lot more going on in the world for sure, just like all of us are. We're
Yeah.
all so much more aware of things going on in the world. And also there during the teen years, there is the spotlight effect. So when you are a teenager, you feel like you have a spotlight on you. You feel like everybody is looking at you, everyone's thinking about you, everyone's worrying about what you're doing and how you look. And for many teens, that can actually be very real because of social media.
Yeah.
because it's different. Like, whereas when we were teens, that spotlight effect, it wasn't so real. Like, we could easily be like, no one's thinking about you. No one's watching your every move. But now if you're sharing stuff on social media constantly, well, some people kind of are watching your every move.
Yeah. Yeah. Which is a ton. I mean, I can't even imagine the stress of that in your teen years, right? Like I post stuff for my business on social media, and at age 50, I worry like, oh, how's that going to land? Or, you have these questions, but to be doing that in your teen years where you don't yet have that grit or that resilience skill fully built up or developed is so much harder. And yeah, those years are tough. I also have journals from my teenage years, but they are in a box in the garage, and you have just inspired me. I'm going to go get them out and take a little look-see to see what was in there, because I'm sure that the drama was also quite heavy-handed.
Yeah, prepare to be terrified. That's my one.
Yeah. Yeah. Melanie, there is just so much good stuff that you've just shared. I have to say, I have learned from our conversation already, and I am so looking forward to having your book in my hot little hands, just so I can better, I'm always looking for ways to better support my own teen, as well as the parents that I work with. And I know, given the richness that you've brought to the last, I don't know, 35, 40 minutes, that I have no doubt that the book will be the same. So this book is set to come out on September 1st. But and most people can order it wherever they order books, whether that's Amazon or Barnes and Noble or, whatever small independent bookstore you support. But you are also willing to share some of your books with our listeners. Tell us about it.
Yeah, so we are doing a giveaway. So you're sharing the link to that, but there is a giveaway to your audience. And so for 3 listeners, you'll be able to click on the link and enter our giveaway and get your own free copy.
Yes, which I'm just thrilled about, because, it's always fun to learn when you listen to a podcast, but folks, you might even win a prize. You might win a prize.
Yes. In this book, I'm very proud of this book because there is not another book like this out on the market. It really does give parents the knowledge that you need to understand, like, what motivation looks like in teens, where your teen might be struggling, and then action steps so that you can create positive change. And so even if your teen isn't struggling with motivation, this book is really all about helping to unlock their potential. And so even if they're motivated, there's ways that you can still really help them reach their potential.
Yeah. Well, and I haven't read the book yet because it's not out yet, but I have to say that, as we were talking today, it strikes me that although this book is sort of targeted towards parents of teens, for those who are listening, who have kids that are not yet teens, some of this would be valuable as well, because if we think about the drive, the grit, and the goals, and the need for our children to learn how to tolerate boredom in order to develop drive, grit, and goals, that is a place that we can have impact when they're 4 and 5 and 6, right? And beyond. And as you said, so many parents are so quick to hand over a cell phone or, an iPad or whatever on a 10-minute drive to the grocery store, because we don't want our kids. I think many of us are like, I don't want my kid bothering me. Right. And so we are offloading the attention to that device, but that may be having long-term impacts on our kids as they hit those teen years and beyond.
Yes,
yeah,
definitely.
So, folks, the link for that to get copies of this book, and, if you've got a toddler, if you've got an elementary school age kid, a tween, a teen, Melanie's not going to check the age of your kid and say you don't qualify for the book. So if you want a copy of this book, if it would be helpful to you, definitely click on the link in the show notes. And there'll be three lucky winners of that. Melanie, thank you so much for the work that you're doing in the world, the way that you're supporting teens. And now with this new book, the way that you are continuing to also support us as parents. I'm so grateful for that in general and for your willingness to share that with us on the podcast today.
Thank you. And thank you so much for having me.
Oh, my pleasure. And I know, as I said, I learned, I know people listening learned, so I'm grateful. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, listeners, thank you so much for joining me for today's podcast episode. As always, I am grateful for your the energy that you are pouring into your own parenting and your own family. And I hope that regardless of the age of child that you have, that you learned as much from Dr. Melanie as I did. You know, a lot of times when I have guests on our show, like I do learn stuff, but a lot of times we're doing very similar work. And Dr. Melanie does different work than I do, right? She works with teenagers. I work with parents. And some of what she shared today was information that I had never heard. I had not, used in my own family. And I'm really excited to do that. Now, as I told you at the beginning of this episode, and, right at the end of talking with Dr. Melanie, you just might be able to get your hands on a free copy of her book. She is giving 3 copies away to listeners of this podcast. And you can do that, or you can get enrolled in that drawing by going to, and this will be in the show notes. Don't worry if you can't write it down right now. Destination U. So that's the word destination and then the word U, Y-O-U, all mushed together, .net/podcast-giveaway. DestinationU.net/podcast-giveaway. That link will be in our show notes, as well as some of the books that she mentioned, links for those books, a link for her book. And in case you don't win one of the free ones, like I said, her book releases on September 1st, and I can't wait to read it. I hope you grab a copy as well. And with that, I'm going to sign off and say, see you next week. Cheers.